Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. We're glad you could join us in what promises to be a lively, incisive, and occasionally snarky deep dive into the hidden corners of our modern health landscape. I'm Ethan Foster, your friendly neighborhood observer of all things human and perplexing.
And I'm Alara Skye, your roving comedic commentator with a penchant for puncturing half-baked ideas, while baking a few all on my own. If you're new here, get comfy. We like to explore, dissect, and occasionally lampoon the health news swirling around us.
We do it all under the banner of cellular wisdom because, believe it or not, your cells might be smarter than some of the folks running big ag and big food, but that's a conversation we'll definitely have today.
Cellular wisdom. Because sometimes your mitochondria have a better moral compass than a corporate boardroom.
Precisely. Now, let's start with a quick note. Dr. Mercola's new book is apparently a bestseller, and the timing couldn't be more perfect to talk about all that swirling around in the world of innovative solutions. That's the theme for today's show. How big business is helping us by tinkering with cow digestion.
The phrase, tinkering with cow digestion alone is comedic gold. It sounds like something you'd see in a cartoon, plucky scientists feeding weird potions to cows. Then you find out it's actually real, brought to you by corporate giants.
According to the headlines, Big Ag's latest bright idea is to chemically re-engineer the cow's burping process. The product in question is called Bovaer, spelled B-O-V-A-E-R. It's a feed additive they claim will cut methane emissions from cows. But beneath the corporate marketing, it's basically a weird chemical cocktail that the cows have to eat every day.
Right? And it's not just, let's feed them an extra serving of kale. It's literally a medley of silicon dioxide, petroleum-derived propylene glycol, and this active compound known as 3-No-P. Makes you wonder how those cocktail parties go in chemical plants. Do they toast with beakers of this stuff?
If you're not picturing a scientist in a lab coat swirling a test tube and saying, "Ah, yes, the nose on this propylene glycol is delightful," then you should be.
And the best part is, every day, if the industry gets its way, each cow will be downing a daily dose of this magical formula. We're talking about an entire worldwide cow population eventually being coaxed into this regimen.
As the marketing goes, a quarter teaspoon per cow is supposed to slash methane by up to 30% for dairy cows and nearly 45% for beef cattle. But you and I both know there's a bigger story here. We'll be diving into that.
Indeed we will. But first, let's mention the corporate behind it all. DSM-Firmenich, a Dutch chemical giant. They're basically on track to earn about $14 billion in 2024. So yes, the word giant fits nicely.
Of course, if you want to keep a giant's pockets lined, all you need is an innovative solution to a hot-button topic, like climate change. Enter Bovaer, right? The holy grail of fixing cow burps.
And at a mere 0.30 a day per cow, multiplied by as many cows as they can recruit. If they only land 10% of the global dairy cow population, they're set to rake in nearly $3 billion. It's a nice gig if you can get it.
They're really good at marketing it as the future of sustainable farming. Meanwhile, in the real world, the product is still in an early adoption phase. Right now, only about 100,000 cattle worldwide get Bovaer. Another 150,000 get a similar product called Agalin. Compare those numbers to the global population of around 260 million dairy cows, and you see this is still a drop in a very large bucket.
But they're pushing forward. The FDA apparently gave the green light for U.S. dairy cattle, and they plan to expand to beef cattle next. Because, let's be honest, once a company invests in an idea, they're going to do everything they can to scale it up.
There's an interesting twist, though. If you believe the marketing, they're helping the planet. But to me, it looks more like they're teaching the planet a new dance step, something the planet never asked to learn in the first place.
Let's break it down for the folks who might be curious. What's in Bovaer exactly?
The official line says it's about 60% silicon dioxide, 30% propylene glycol, and 10% 3-NOP, also known as 3-nitrooxypropanol. That's the fancy chemical that's supposed to block an enzyme the methane-producing bacteria in cow stomachs rely on. So the argument is, if you block that enzyme, you block the methane.
Right. And do we know what else might happen when we block that enzyme? Because nature tends to have a reason for everything. And if you start shutting down certain pathways, other pathways might go a little bananas.
That's one of the big questions. 3-NOP breaks down into nitrites and propionic acid. The marketing tries to spin that as no biggie, like, oh, it breaks down into these friendly compounds. But in truth, we're rerouting the entire digestive process that ruminants have developed over millennia.
And let's face it, these ruminants have been living in a cyclical relationship with the land for a very, very long time, long before any chemical additive was discovered.
I love that you highlight the cyclical part, because that's exactly the argument for why cow methane isn't the monster Big Ag wants us to think it is. In a natural scenario, the carbon in the plants becomes methane in the cow, which eventually returns to carbon dioxide that gets recycled by plants again.
That's the difference between a closed cycle and introducing brand new greenhouse gases from industrial processes that dig up ancient carbon and fling it around in ways the planet can't handle.
Yes. So ironically, they're tackling this so-called problem of cow emissions while ignoring the far bigger problem of synthetic fertilizer production. And it's mind-blowing how conveniently that's left out of the conversation.
Let's be real. The same corporations pushing these feed additives often rely on synthetic fertilizers in their supply chains. Methane from producing synthetic nitrogen might be underreported by a factor of 100, according to that Cornell study. Imagine if we put all that money and attention on solutions that don't require more synthetic chemicals.
That's precisely the question. Because we have regenerative agriculture as an alternative, we know that rotating animals on pasture, letting them graze, letting the soil microorganisms do their thing, that's an actual solution. But that solution, ironically, doesn't line corporate pockets.
Exactly. No patent on letting cows eat grass. Nobody's going to brand nature's original plan and sell it for $0.30 a day per cow. That's the rub.
All right, let's pivot to the safety studies, since that's a big part of the marketing push for Bovaer. They love to say, we've done 15 years of trials, everything's safe, but it's worth doing a quick comedic rummage into what that really means.
Right. Because, as always, who's funding these studies? The company that wants to sell the product. This is like a fox wearing a lab coat presenting a slideshow on how it's not going to raid the henhouse.
Very much so. And a lot of the data is provided by the manufacturer. Regulatory bodies may review the summary findings, but they're often not reanalyzing raw data in detail.
Bingo. So it's not exactly the bulletproof science we might imagine. Some tests were done in vitro, meaning in a lab dish. Others were done on rats. Some short-term tests on small groups of cows. And that's supposed to fill everyone with confidence?
One cow study was on just 16 cows. Another had 80 cows. And they ran into issues like cows losing interest in their feed, some having to be euthanized, changes in blood markers. You don't need a comedic genius to see the red flags.
And let's talk about the rat study where they noticed an uptick in rare intestinal tumors. The researchers basically said, we can't dismiss that as random, but also we need more data. Another of those convenient, we need more data disclaimers that often get swept under the rug once there's a big marketing push.
Exactly. They ended up with ambiguous statements like, some uncertainty remains about how dairy cows tolerate 3-NOP. Not the warm, fuzzy bullet point I'd put on a marketing brochure, but it's in the scientific record.
Let's pause and let that phrase soak in. We're not 100% sure how cows tolerate this. Yet, it's already in the pipeline for wide adoption. It's like we're ignoring the possibility that nature might rebel when we start rewriting the digestive code of ruminants.
Yes, and let's not forget the farm workers who have to handle this powder every day. The dust can be an irritant, might cause harm if inhaled, but that's apparently just a small footnote in the product manual.
As are many inconveniences in industrial agriculture. Meanwhile, the official line is extensively tested and proven safe, and we're just supposed to nod along.
Precisely. Then we have the bigger question of messing with something that's worked for eons. A cow's 4-chambered stomach is basically an ecological masterpiece. They eat roughage humans can't digest. Convert it to nutrient-dense milk and meat, and all that methane they produce gets reabsorbed by plants in a cyclical dance.
The planet's done that dance for thousands of years, but apparently it's not fancy enough for the boardroom types. They want to see new products. They want to fix a process that's arguably not broken.
Or at least not broken in the sense Big Ag claims. The so-called greenhouse gas crisis from cows is often misrepresented. Yes, methane is a greenhouse gas, but the key is understanding that it's a short-lived gas in a natural cycle. Meanwhile, CO2 from burning fossil fuels is brand new carbon introduced into the mix.
But telling people to scale back synthetic fertilizer use or change feedlot practices doesn't make big money for the chemical companies, so we get Bovaer as the official solution. Then you see the marketing that the environment will thank us.
But we all know the environment might not be thanking us in a few years if we discover unintended consequences like altered gut flora or chemical residues that accumulate in the ecosystem.
Exactly. The environment tends to be subtle in its pushback, until it's not so subtle. Then we get big problems and wonder how we got there.
That's the crux. We can see the same pattern in other industries. Whether it's glyphosate use or chemical pesticides, we eventually realize nature is pretty good at balancing itself. Until we come in with one-size-fits-all chemical quick fixes.
Which leads us to the big topic. If Big Ag is so worried about greenhouse gases, why aren't they talking about synthetic nitrogen fertilizers? That's an enormous emitter of methane and nitrous oxide, but it's not generating the same flashy headlines.
Because they don't want to highlight the Achilles heel of conventional agriculture. It's not nearly as profitable to fix. Plus, they'd have to revamp their entire business model if we started talking about natural solutions like regenerative practices.
Indeed, the Haber-Bosch process used to create synthetic fertilizers is energy-intensive, reliant on fossil fuels, and it's a net addition of carbon that was previously locked away. Cow burps, on the other hand, recycle atmospheric carbon that was recently captured by plants.
That's a big difference, but it's overshadowed by these sensational claims about cow methane being the climate villain.
Let's pivot to what might really fix these issues. Regenerative agriculture. Instead of feeding cows additives, how about letting them roam and graze on actual grass? Let them naturally fertilize the soil, build up organic matter, and strengthen the carbon cycle. That's something we know works.
But no one can slap a big price tag or a fancy chemical name on that. It's just synergy between animals, microbes, and plants. Not exactly the golden goose for corporate shareholders.
So we end up with a system that tries to sell us solutions for problems that we could handle by simply stepping away from hyper-industrialization. We load up on chemical fixes, then more chemicals to fix the side effects of those original chemicals. On and on it goes.
Precisely. Then we get to a certain point and say, wait, maybe we should just do this nature's way. But by then, the chemical companies have raked in billions.
And it's not just a question of money. It's also about the health of the cows, the people eating the products, the farm workers dealing with it, and the land itself.
That's the big takeaway. Folks, if you want to push back against these questionable innovations, the simplest step is to vote with your wallet. Instead of buying industrial meat and dairy, seek out farmers who practice regenerative methods, support local cooperatives, or direct farm-to-table operations.
Because that's the real solution. Letting the cows do what they've done for ages in a system that respects them, respects the soil, and nurtures biodiversity. No $0 a day chemical required.
All right, let's talk about the clean green marketing veneer that's so pervasive. Every big chemical or biotech corporation loves to position themselves as champions of sustainability. They trot out words like clean energy, climate friendly, or methane reduction. But behind that is often an old model of industrial extraction and chemical dependence.
Right. If they were truly champions of the environment, they'd tackle the massive synthetic fertilizer problem. They'd encourage soil building processes. They'd fund research into low input systems. But that's not where the money is, so we get Bovaer.
Makes you wonder how many other chemical solutions are waiting in the wings. Bovaer is just one example. The minute we say we need to reduce greenhouse gases, they might come up with a half dozen new compounds to dose chickens, pigs, or fish.
Soon we'll have a different additive for every digestive system on the planet, courtesy of the same folks. Why not? If it's profitable, they'll brand it as progress.
The pattern is consistent. Find a scapegoat, here it's cow methane, then offer a patented fix that you can sell at scale. The environment's actually an afterthought.
Meanwhile, we see glimpses of truth in the data that gets glossed over. For instance, those safety studies that mention potential genotoxicity, or unknown tolerance levels. That's serious stuff, but it's overshadowed by the hype about climate-saving potential.
Precisely, and we've seen it before. For decades, we were told certain chemicals were safe. Then it took years to realize they cause persistent issues in the environment or in our bodies. By the time the alarm was sounded, the damage was done.
Now, I'm not saying Bovaer is going to single-handedly cause ecological collapse, but the principle stands. Messing with biological processes can have ripple effects we don't foresee.
I'm with you on that. And that's the point we want our listeners to really understand. We're not suggesting people form a picket line outside a Bovaer manufacturing plant, but we want them to realize there's more nuance here.
Exactly. This is about being informed, asking hard questions, and not taking corporate marketing at face value. When they say, we found a way to slash cow burps, maybe ask, do we even need to slash those burps in the first place?
Right. Because if you consider the biogenic carbon cycle, those burps were part of a closed loop. Meanwhile, the truly serious carbon problem is new carbon from fossil fuels that's being spewed into the atmosphere.
Or the synthetic fertilizer angle, which is a big methane emitter because it's a brand new addition to the atmosphere. The land had no say in that.
Let's illustrate the difference clearly for listeners. The carbon in cow burps was in the atmosphere a year or two ago, inside the grass the cow ate. That's a short cycle. But the carbon from oil or natural gas was underground for millions of years, never part of the immediate cycle, until we drilled it up.
So by continuing to rely on synthetic fertilizers and fossil fuels, we're dumping brand new greenhouse gases into the mix. Meanwhile, focusing on cow burps is like focusing on a paper cut while ignoring a severed artery.
That's a good analogy. But you can't blame the corporations for focusing on the easy marketing strategy. They can't say, we should reduce synthetic fertilizers that made us billions. That's not in their interest.
Which brings us back to the theme of the day. Follow the money. The more you do, the clearer it becomes why these so-called solutions pop up.
Let's talk a bit about the concept of nature's perfect design. Ruminants are part of the ecology that shaped so many grasslands. In North America, there were tens of millions of bison, plus deer, moose, and other grazing animals long before we introduced feedlots. Did the planet implode from methane back then?
It did not, because the cycle was intact. The land, the animals, the atmosphere formed a balanced system, or as balanced as nature can be. Then we show up with industrial-scale everything, and it's as if we can't wait to disrupt the equilibrium.
So instead of returning to what worked, we decide to tinker with the fundamental digestive process. It's the ultimate case of trying to outsmart nature rather than work with it.
And history has shown us that rarely ends well. We can tweak a system for a short-term benefit, but nature usually sneaks around with a surprise after a few years.
Precisely. That's a big reason we encourage people to think about regenerative or holistic agriculture. It's not just a dreamy concept for hippies and tie-dye. It's a system that's based on the principle that nature knows what it's doing.
Right. Rotational grazing, building soil fertility through manure, and letting the cows harvest their own feed from the fields, rather than trucking in feed grown with synthetic fertilizers halfway across the country. All of that is more sustainable, and it respects that cyclical carbon flow.
Not to mention better for the cows, who get to roam around, actually do normal cow stuff instead of being confined to feedlots.
Exactly. Which leads to better quality food for us, potentially better health outcomes for the animals, and fosters biodiversity on the land. That's a triple win.
Meanwhile, Bovaer is a bit like putting a Band-Aid on a system that's hemorrhaging from all sides. Sure, maybe it reduces a fraction of the methane, but it doesn't address soil degradation, overuse of synthetic fertilizers, or the break in natural cycles.
Indeed. And that's where the comedic irony becomes almost too thick to slice. You have these multi-billion-dollar companies solving a problem that's largely of their own creation, industrial feedlot systems. Then they sell it back to farmers, who pay more money for the additive, which lines the pockets of the chemical giant.
And around we go. At some point, you have to sit back and ask, is this entire scenario just a commercial for an unnecessary product?
In many ways, yes. The real fix might be to dismantle some of these industrial practices in favor of more decentralized, natural systems. But that's a conversation that can't be had when all the marketing money is directed at Bovaer-like innovations.
So, folks, that's the gist. We see a cunning push for a chemical solution to cow digestion that, on the surface, sounds virtuous. Hey, we're reducing methane, we're saving the planet. But once you peel back the layers, it's a question of profit, ignoring root causes and messing with complex biological systems.
And not to mention a potential Trojan horse for who knows what side effects over the long haul. The technology might be new, but the story is old.
It's the story of corporate control, big marketing, questionable research, and the inevitable ignoring of simpler, more holistic solutions that have no big brand attached to them.
So if you're listening and wondering what you can do with this knowledge, the simplest route is to support local farmers who practice sustainable and regenerative methods. Skip the mainstream industrial stuff that might eventually come from cows-fed daily chemicals for the rest of their lives.
Because every time we buy from local or regenerative sources, we vote against the corporate narrative that we need high-tech, high-dollar solutions for a problem that may not even be a problem in the first place.
Exactly. And for those who worry about greenhouse gases, remember that the Earth's carbon cycle is quite efficient, if we let it be. The real climate culprit might be found in the factories making synthetic fertilizers, not in the rumen of a cow peacefully chewing grass.
Well said. Now, stepping back, let's also mention Dr. Mercola's perspective, which often points toward natural, holistic approaches. That includes acknowledging that these cycles exist and that the solution is usually to align with them, not rearrange them chemically.
Exactly. And that's why his new book, which apparently is a bestseller, is relevant here. It's all about understanding health at a cellular level, because if your cells aren't thriving, your body isn't thriving. The same principle applies to cows and the planet. If we keep adding chemicals to tweak fundamental processes, we might be ignoring the big picture.
Precisely. A lot of modern diseases stem from a mismatch between how our bodies evolved and how we currently live. Similarly, a lot of ecological issues stem from a mismatch between how the Earth's cycles evolved and how we practice agriculture.
So, dear listeners, you don't need a quarter teaspoon of 3-nop daily to protect the planet. What you might need is a willingness to question marketing narratives, dig into the facts, and support systems that respect nature's original brilliance.
That's a pretty good concluding note. Any final witty remarks up your sleeve?
I just wonder if the Bovaer marketing team is brainstorming slogans like Bovaer, because cows never asked for a natural digestive system anyway, or give your cows the daily pick-me-up they never knew they needed.
Quite possible. And if you see that slogan appear, you'll know they owe you royalties.
Exactly. Now, folks, as always, if you found this conversation engaging, keep that curiosity alive. Look deeper into the issues, examine who's funding the research, and above all, realize that Earth's cycles have been tested far longer than any corporate product.
Right. Thanks for joining us on Dr. Mercola's Cellular Wisdom. We hope this discussion sheds some light, and maybe a little comedic relief, on the bizarre but true story of chemically altering cow burps.
Until next time, I'm Alara Sky.
And I'm Ethan Foster. Keep your mind open, your humor intact, and your health in your own hands. Because real wisdom might just be found in the simplest places, like the rumen of a cow roaming in a pasture.
Who would have thought? Take care, everyone, and remember that nature's been at this game for a very long time. Maybe we should listen.
Indeed. Bye for now.